Good morning, everyone. Chris Hayes here for Sickness to Strength. Day number one, workout number one of Operation Fat Thor. Okay, today is May 7th. We're going to get this thing rolling the right way. So we're starting with an anterior chain focused day. So when I say anterior posterior chain, a lot of people kind of think of this relative to push-pull workouts. It's maybe a more common term that a lot of people like to use, but that's not entirely true to what I'm going to be presenting you with. So when I talk about an anterior and a posterior chain relative workout, today being an anterior chain is that if I turn my body sideways and I cut myself in half with a pane of glass, I want to think about all the muscle groups that are on the front side of that body, okay? And when you talk about anatomical neutral, that's actually with palms facing forward. So what that's going to look like today is that we're going to have a large movement involving the chest, the shoulders, and a quad dominant movement with the legs. Those are going to be the major movements that I refer to behind me. Major movements are generally large compound movements crossing multiple joints that allow us to use and move larger weights, get a lot more core activation, and hopefully drive more shift hormonally, increase the amount of work on type 2 muscle fibers, things like that, so that we can produce more results from a physical perspective over the long haul in the course of the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever that's going to look like. The major movements are always going to be the fundamental things that we check back in and that we will repeat, usually on a weekly or bi-weekly base. We might sometimes change what those major movements are and then come back to them, cycle them in and out. That's what we'll talk about moving forward from here. So let's take a look at what we're doing today. Major movements for today are going to be the incline bench, the push press, and hex bar deadlifts. So like I said, touching on all of those major body parts, right? We are going to include biceps in today as a minor movement. The reason that I like to do chest and biceps together is that I'm not really taking away from the major movement that I'm producing. While biceps are active a little bit in the lowering motion as far as a stabilizer, and they do get some passive work as far as from an eccentric portion, I'm not really so concerned about them taking away from any of those lifts individually. So our minor movements for today are going to be the push-up plus, curl variants, which are just going to be regular bicep curls and hammer curls today, lateral raises, vacuum planks, and then we're going to do double leg extensions. So one of the things that I do like to do is that sometimes I will mix these into supersets. That way I can be efficient with my time. That way I can also keep my heart rate elevated. And I'm not somebody who enjoys the 3 or the 4 hour workout. You know, it's great to be able to do that when you're in a gym setting and you're able to socialize and do some of those things. Obviously, we're going to be a little hamstrung by what's going on in the world currently. So to me, I like to get in. I want to take my time on my major movements, but if I can find a way to superset and get things done, get it knocked out a little bit quicker, that's definitely something that I like to do. So cardio for today is going to be 20 minutes total. We're going to be doing all of that on the assault bike. So 10 minutes in the warm up, which is going to be more just like a moderate pace, and then 10 minutes to finish off, where we're going to be not necessarily doing intervals, but trying to keep the pace a little bit higher. There's going to be some on and offs. I'm just going to try and keep my heart rate elevated, definitely above that 130, 140 mark, and making sure that I work up a good sweat by the end of this thing. So outside of that, set some reps, at least for the initial phase of this, for maybe the first couple weeks, and maybe we'll see, we might phase it out even further, is that we're going to do 3 sets of 12 on all these different movements, and that's what it's going to look like. So day number one, let's get after it. All right, guys, first movement that we're starting with today is the incline bench. Now, you do have the option of supersetting this with curl variants. That's what I did today to keep my workout efficient and keep it moving. So as far as coaching this movement, what am I looking for? First thing that I'm trying to do as soon as I get onto the bench is I'm getting my scaps or my shoulder blades squeezed together and flat down to the bench.
You will notice I do have a slight arch in my back as well. A limited arch is okay. Try not to be too aggressive. We don't want to place too much strain on the low back. Outside of that, elbows should be at 90 degrees or even just slightly outside of that. The way that I like to focus on doing this is you can find those collars on the bar generally. It is a little bit different if you're using an Olympic weightlifting bar relative to a regular bar, but you can use those to find a pretty consistent grip that works for you, that allows your hands to be wide enough to where you can get down to 90 degrees at the base, so that you can see that good effective angle at the elbow. Now I'm just trying to get just above the nipple line and I'm trying to hit 90 degrees. I'm not concerned with touching the chest. Good solid reps, 2 count up, 2 count down. Moving on to our next major movement, we're moving to the push press, which is going to be our shoulder dominant movement for this workout. Now you will notice that I do have a good healthy rack position. My elbows are tucked underneath the bar. That weight is being loaded vertically through the wrist down into the elbow. Some of you may not have the mobility in the wrist to do this position effectively. If so, you may need to do some work so that you can get to that spot. But coaching for this technique, I definitely do not have perfect technique on this at the moment, and this is due to a little bit of lack of mobility through the hips and definitely some tightness in the quads and hip flexors. So you will notice, especially in that first section, that I was driving the knees forward a little bit more than I would have liked, but I'm loading back into the hips. That allows me to drive through my glutes and get a little bit more snap through. I get a little bit of pop out of the bottom, and my finishing position is vertically in line with my ears so that my spine is taking that weight into a neutral position. Now my finishing position on the end of this lift, as you'll notice from this rear view, is that I'm actually trying to get my scaps set back and down into position so that when I finish, that weight is as effectively loaded through the spine and as neutral as possible. Moving on to our last major movement, we have hex bar deadlifts, optional superset with lateral raises on this. So what am I looking for? First thing that I want to do is I want to get my feet just slightly wider than shoulder width. You can play with your feet positioning to shift the weight a little bit more into your quads. Narrow stance or wider stance is kind of just dependent on your build and what feels best for you. Slightly wider than feet width feels good for me. So you'll notice that I actually use the weight to kind of screw myself down into my heels and load back into my hips. Now I'm looking for good effective angles both at the knee and at the hip. I want essentially good vertical lines. If I'm having any sort of rounding, whether it's in the lower back or the upper back, or my knees are driving too far forward, then I'm definitely overcompensating in one way or another. Now I didn't showcase bad form here, but main thing is you want to stay loaded through your heels, good effective angles, and I want a good snap through and follow through with the glutes to finish the motion. All right, on to curl variants. So we're going to start with bad form and some rounding in the shoulders so that you can see what that looks like. This is definitely not the position that we want to be in. As you can see, as soon as I set my scaps and squeeze my mid back, it definitely changes the angles around the shoulder and at the elbow. So again, bad form, shoulders out of position here. And then we're going to drop them back, squeeze those scaps, and get them back into a good position. So anytime we do curls, we want to try and get those elbows almost locked to the side if we can. And I want to allow myself to drive them forward just slightly so that I can get a more full extension and a little bit larger range. Now there are some changes and some modifications when it comes to doing some other bicep lifts, but just for the basics here, we want good full long extension and control both through the contractile phase and the eccentric phase. So the raising and the lowering, but I want you to always think good 2 count up, 2 count down, good stable shoulder position, and I want to keep my chin tucked and my eyes forward. Okay, on to push-up plus and vacuum planks. So we're going to start with the push-up plus here, and we just want good, effective, normal push-up setup. So elbows to the sides, I want to be at about 90 degrees, maybe even slightly wider for this. The reason being is that I want to start to create a neurological pattern from the brain down to the muscles around the scaps and the mid-back and shoulder blades. So you'll notice I'm getting a full extension up at the top, really driving those shoulder blades apart, stretching out those muscles so that we can learn to both elongate but also get a full contraction at the base as well. So by doing this, we're kind of patterning and teaching the body to go ahead and adapt and learn how to control the positioning of the shoulder blades so that when we use them in larger lifts and upper body movements, we can have a stable base to lift from and hopefully lessen our risk for injury as a result. All right, next we're moving on to the vacuum plank. So this may not be the best view to showcase this, but that's all right. So essentially what we're doing here is we're just doing a plank. And now, why is that any different than what I want you to do? All we're trying to do here is we're trying to get the internal obliques and the transverse abdominis to contract in the process of holding a regular plank. So by doing this, we activate that internal weight belt, which really helps stabilize the low back and the pelvis for our major movements. It's just that we're mixing it in with normal planking on top of it. So the only difference and the only way that I modify this so that I can get a little bit more activation is that I bridge the hips just slightly higher than normal. You will see that my scaps are a little bit spread out. Just that's reflective of me driving my hips up a little bit higher. But I really want you to focus on driving that belly button back in towards your spine, almost like you're taking a real deep breath in and you're sucking that belly button, trying to pull it in through your back. And then you just want to contract down as hard as you can while you're holding that plank position. Other than that, we just got to suffer through it. Next, we move on to lateral raises with the option for double leg extensions for your superset. So we're going to start off in bad form here. You'd be surprised how often you see this. Look at the rounding in the shoulder and the overactivation that comes from the traps. And I will be displaying that and displaying poor form at the start of these next 3 exchanges. So just kind of pay attention to what's going on around the shoulder and just how much that does change the action around the muscles around the neck and the upper traps. So we always want to have shoulder blades pinned back. As you can see here from this view, we have a nice stable base in the mid-back. That allows me to disengage the upper traps at least to a major extent. You're not going to see that overactivation and internal rotation at the shoulder that you're going to see at the start right here. So if you are doing this or if you have a tendency of having any sort of shoulder issues, make sure that you are very cognizant of opening up your posture. You want to be nice, strong, and stable in that mid-back when you are doing any sort of shoulder activity, but any upper body activity in general. Last movement of the day, we're going to be doing double leg extensions. Now, a lot of the same coaching goes true to the vacuum plank that we were doing as well earlier, but the main thing you want to focus on here is that we want to keep the low back flat to the floor. Now, you'll notice here, I'm actually stretching my legs out a little bit further, trying to show you guys what happens when you overreach and you actually get that hip roll. So we want to avoid that hip roll because then we drive that into the hip flexors and the groin, and we actually carry more of that stress through the low back. So trying to keep the spine hollowed out down, flush to the floor. I want to reach just as far as I can to where I'm able to maintain that good, stable, neutral position through the trunk. Anything further than that, we're definitely kicking it into areas that we don't want. So try and be cognizant of that. Back flat to the floor, stay engaged, and hand positioning just where you feel comfortable, but down to the side I always feel is the most stable.
All right, guys. Workout number 1, as far as the lifts are over with. I want to do a brief recap just after all the workouts and talk about anything that I did or I didn't like. Maybe if I pushed myself too hard or if I didn't feel like I was producing the movements appropriately. Everything felt pretty good for the most part today. I did notice that I didn't have great access back into my hips and definitely a little bit of compensation with the upper body and the shoulders, things like that. which I'll break down a little bit more in another video. It's not something that's very easy to kind of cut into on this. I will talk about it when I'm coaching all the motions individually, but I do struggle with, and a lot of us struggle with, something called upper cross syndrome, which really, especially as of right now, we're spending a lot of time indoors, spending a lot of time sitting, a lot of time on the computer, on the phone, things like that. So that's something that will need to be addressed with kind of some specific and targeted work that I will include into the workouts that I produce. And we'll talk about those things as we go along. But the movements all went pretty good today. Something I didn't talk about at the beginning of this is that, especially this first week and these first days, it's not about attacking 3 sets of 12 with 100% intensity. Okay, we're looking to shoot for around somewhere between 60 to 75%, maybe 80, 85% on that last set of whatever you do, especially if you're doing straight sets of things. So it's not about pushing the weight at this point. That's something we'll get into as we get to weeks, probably 3 and 4. Right now, it's just about producing good, solid motion with proper technique and form, okay? And just getting the body used to motion again, getting it used to being under loads, and producing proper movement patterns. So workout number 1 is good. I might clip in a little bit of bike just so you can trust me and you know that I did it, but we're gonna knock out 10 minutes on the bike. That's gonna be it for the day. Hope you guys enjoy the workout. If you have any questions on anything, any movements you feel like you need more coaching on, something along those lines, please leave it down. Shoot me a message, let me know in the comments, things like that. Also, if there are other good videos on certain motions on other channels that I really like and I think they do a good job of explaining, I may link to those as well. So hope you guys are having a great day. If you're in a bad space, that's okay. We're just getting this ball rolling. Stay up, stay strong. The war goes on.
I'm a man of my word. Just like I said, I'll see you soon, guys.